When you are weary and you can't sleep, just count your blessings instead of sheep. Then you'll fall asleep, counting your blessings. And when your bankroll is getting small, just think of when you had none at all. Then you'll fall asleep, counting your blessings.
I dreamed a dream of returning back to our old neighborhood and being on my grandparents' street, East 124th, off of Superior Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. Also, bear in mind that my parents, me, and my family, even after my marriage, and all of my siblings except for my brother Gary, had all lived on this street at some point during our adult lives. It seemed as if it was a Sunday afternoon in the late spring or early summer of the year when I made my way to my grandparents' building. It was a brown bricked 4-suite apartment complex that over the years had housed most all of my immediate family, cousins, and in-laws at some point in time in each of our lives. At its core, and at its height in the primes of our younger lives, it was my grandfather, Daddy Cleve, who resided in the lower unit on the right side, and my eldest brother, Jesse Jr., who occupied the lower unit on the left side. A few years later in life, my parents would ultimately occupy the unit that my brother Jesse Jr. had once occupied. In the two upper-level units, my sisters, Felicia and Keitha, and their families dwelled up there. Lisa occupied the right side unit above my grandfather, and Keitha occupied the upper left unit up above my brother Jesse. On this particular afternoon in my dream, it appeared that I arrived on a day of goodbyes, as many of those family members mentioned and their families and friends had all come together to say goodbye to the occupants of our building, as everyone was leaving there for good. It had been both a happy and sad occasion, as many of us shared memories of laughs and good times, along with some not so good times and some tears that took place there over the many years that we owned the building. I remember seeing the Calmes, Daniels, Carpenter, Watson, Faulkner, Anderson, and many other families, friends, and loved ones in and out of the building that day. They were all sharing in the well wishes for all of us as we moved on in life, and they also helped us to clear everything out of the building for the new owner. As the afternoon grew later and turned into the night, both Daddy, Cleve, and Keitha's apartments had been totally emptied out. The new owner, an older white gentleman who was kind of tall and had a shadowed salt and pepper gray head, had already took possession of the lower left side unit that had been occupied by my eldest brother, and later, at the time of this move, occupied by my parents. The only unit remaining to clear out was the upper right side unit that belonged to my eldest sister, Felicia. She seemingly had the hardest time moving forward, So I ran up the stairs into her apartment where I found Terry, who was her ex-fiance and the father of her son Shalimar, telling her that it was time to move on. Also, in the apartment with Terry was his best friend Dave and my nephew DJ's dad, Danny Calmes, my big brother. They were also up there, encouraging Lisa that everything would be okay and that it was now time to go. I found my sister sitting in the dark, sitting on her couch with her head down and in her hands. She was crying and depressed. So I laid my hands on her shoulders and began to encourage her also. And then I prayed for her. By the time I finished the prayer, Lisa was ready to go. And all of the aforementioned gentlemen helped her move out of the building. I began to make my way down the long stairway at the apartment complex, and I found myself stumbling as I struggled downward. I had exhausted everything within me spiritually, while pouring into my sister's spirit to help lift hers up. As I am grabbing the rails of the stairs and trying to hold myself up as I make my way down, the new owner of the building, the older white gentleman I mentioned, he peered his head out of his apartment door and witnessed my struggle. He had on a pair of old-fashioned circular, round, black-rimmed glasses and a very thin but freshly trimmed mustache. And he also had a pointy nose with bushy gray eyebrows. He knew that I was in no shape to travel any further that evening, and he said to me that I was too weary to go on any further. He suggested that I stop to rest at his apartment for a while. He was cooking food on the stove and offered me a meal, and when he saw that I still lacked strength even after eating, he then told me that I could rest in the empty guest bedroom until the morning. So I did as he suggested and went and laid down to sleep in what was ironically my old bedroom there. As the night grew darker and darker, and as the night grew later and later, I noticed that in the rest of the apartment that the lights never went out. I also heard the older gentleman, the owner, in constant conversation all night long, but was whispering so as not to bother me while I slept. Finally, at the breaking of dawn, I could see the sunlight beginning to slowly peer through the blinds of the guest bedroom window. It was at this time that I then heard the front door of the apartment being opened, and a pair of two different footsteps coming down the long hallway to the bedroom door where I lay. The first set of footsteps that I heard was that of the building's owner, who I had heard throughout the night. But the second set of footsteps were feet that I had most definitely heard before. Those soft, sweet, and purposed steps. Steps that had been ordered by the Lord. Steps of ones whose feet carried the gospel of peace. Oh yes, I believe I recognize those footsteps coming for me. The old white gentleman opened the bedroom door and made a way for the guest to walk into the room with me. As I was turning over from facing the window to face the doorway so that I could see who it was who had entered, my head had been touched by the soft hands of one who was anointed with oil. And I knew that touch. And I felt the oil run down my face.
Ain't no problem. No problems.
And I knew the scent.
He done healed you.
And I knew that I had recognized that voice that was trying to whisper before coming down the hallway. I said, "Mama, is that you?" And she answered me and said, "Get on up from there. You're ready now, son." I jumped up out of the bed to reach and to grab my mother's arms so that I could lay in them, rest in them, cry in them, just like I used to. But Mama had gone. As I walked down the long hallway to exit the apartment, I thanked the man for allowing me to rest, but more importantly, for allowing me to feel my mother's touch just one more time. He opened the door of his apartment and he nodded his head at me and he ushered me out. I realized in passing by this gentleman now that it had been simply the younger version of my granddad, Daddy Cleve, the whole time. I thought to myself, he was still the one making sure that all those who enter his building would always leave better than when they first arrived. We are products of our environment, an environment where fellowship, love, prayer, and compassion fixed a many of broken souls. It is like the Lord's church, where people enter it one way, but they leave it in another way. This is simply the story of redemption. And redemption, my friend, is a powerful thing. Run well, family. Run well. And it is so.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Say it 7 times. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.